In the old low-light gallery in North Shields, there's a beautiful oil painting. It shows ancient Greek working men stripped to the waist, constructing a temple. Now, the artist was a local painter called Victor Noble Rainbird, and all his other paintings are of contemporary working men, fishermen and their wives on the Tyne. So this is a mystery, and it begs the question of why there's so much interest in ancient Greek architecture in the northeast.
Here I am in the heart of England's northeast in Tyne and Wear, not far from Washington, and it's actually about halfway between Sunderland and Durham. You can just about see Durham Cathedral on the skyline. And what should I find but a classical Greek temple on the top of an old coal mine? What is it doing here? You can see it from miles around. I've always wanted to know exactly what it is, so we've come here to find out. Climbing up a hill like that reminds me of something, and that's climbing up to see the great temples of ancient Greece, like the Parthenon and the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. And in fact, this reminds me very strongly of a particular Greek temple. It turns out to be a miniature version of the famous Temple of Theseus in Athens. It was built in 1844-5, and it was built in honour of the memory of Jack Lambton, who was the local MP, but he'd also been Governor General of Canada. And he'd become very famous because he'd actually been on the side of the Canadian rebels. He was quite a Democrat. And so it was felt to honour his memory, they should build a temple that signified Greek democracy. Now, when Sunderland AFC commissioned a new crest, which was on the occasion of opening the Stadium of Light in 1997, they decided that they were going to actually have the Penshaw monument on the crest. So here we have in the top right corner, Penshaw monument with the sun coming up over it, and their motto, which is a bit of Latin, Consectatio Excellentiae, the pursuit of excellence.
The Penshaw monument was built over a coal mine, and there are other links between classics and the mining industry in the northeast. Over in Lancaster, to the west of Durham, the miners were expert archaeologists. They used to collect Roman objects when they were excavating and digging new mine shafts. And on their trade union banner, they proudly depicted a Roman soldier alongside a picture of a miner. In several of the pit villages around Hadrian's Wall, there were miners genuinely interested in ancient Roman history, and some of their finds actually ended up in the Great North Museum. I caught up with the Keeper of Archaeology, Andrew Parkin, to discuss some of the fascinating objects from ancient Greece.
So ancient Greek myth and history is absolutely full of fighting, at least that's what their history and their myths tell us. What kind of objects have survived that tell us a bit about that warfare?
We have quite a few objects on display that relate to ancient Greek warfare. And one of the nicest, most interesting ones is a helmet, a bronze helmet called a Corinthian helmet, probably hammered from just one sheet of bronze. And it's typical of the gear worn by a heavily armoured soldier called a hoplite.
I'm stood in front of 3 altars here with Latin texts on, and they were set up by soldiers who were based at the fort of Carabruth on Hadrian's Wall. One of these altars is really amazing because it has a recess in the back where you can put a light to shine, which would have been really atmospheric inside the dark Mithraeum. I'm an archaeologist, I'm not a classicist, and I was often scared by the word classics because I didn't study Latin or Greek at school. I went to a state school where it wasn't offered, but archaeology and classics are really linked.
This is the tombstone of Regina. Well, actually it's a replica of the tombstone of Regina. The original usually lives in South Shields. I got into classics at school, where I learned a bit about the Romans, and then I went on to study classics at Newcastle University. So I've never really moved out of the northeast. I've always been around the area, living and working. And I studied classics to PhD level at Newcastle, and then I went on to teach it. I work now for the Open University.
The ancient Greek vases in the collection fascinated a little boy called Lee Hall, who grew up in Newcastle upon Tyne. And he grew up to be a very famous playwright and screenwriter. He got to know the poet Tony Harrison, who's lived here since 1969 and has written on many classical themes. And in one of those poems, he talks about standing on the River Tyne under the old fish market.
This was built in 1880 on the site where people have been selling fish. The fishwives have been selling them here for hundreds of years. And in 1880, this wonderful building was erected, and on the top of it, a statue was commissioned of who else but the sea god Neptune. One of the most famous residents of Newcastle is the poet Tony Harrison, winner of numerous prizes. His poems are full of classical references. Swirled detritus and driftwood pass in state the 1880 Sassanena Cold Storage Co. And Neptune gazes at the Tyne's flows seawards, where the sea winds blast and bluster at the northeast coast. The sluggish Tyne meandering through the stays and shipyards of Peru.
Just up the road from the old fish market is another classically themed building. It's called the Lit and Phil. One of the courses of lectures delivered in the 19th century at the Lit and Phil was on ancient Greek drama. So I'm going to talk to a local history expert about performances of ancient theatre in the Northeast.
The People's Theatre was founded in 1911. Colin Veitch was one of the half dozen or so founders of the People's Theatre, as well as being captain of Newcastle United Football Club. The first Greek plays came shortly after its foundation in 1911. Perhaps one of the most famous Greek productions was a production of Euripides' The Trojan Women. J.B. Priestley saw a rehearsal when he was travelling the country researching his book English Journey.
Classical theatre's alive and kicking in the Northeast again. There's a new play based on a book by award-winning writer David Almond playing in the Northeast.
Theatregoers continue to be compelled to come and see the great tragedies and the great classic stories. And what's beautiful about this production is it introduces this epic, timeless myth to teenagers. So it might be their very first introduction to this magical story, which is great.
These stories hold together the whole of civilization, they hold together all of storytelling, they hold together all of music and art. You know, when you hear some people talking about the classic, it's almost like they say, we possess this. This is ours. You know, maybe you'll be able to get a glance at it, but it's not really for you. And I think it's really important to break down that kind of sense of what the classics are for everybody, in all places, at all times.
One initiative I'm very proud of is our Advocating Classics Education at the University of Durham, which is working with partners all across the Northeast to expand the availability of classics.
I think it's so important that we have and we foster and cultivate networks between schools and to provide support for teachers. It's about being able to spend time introducing young people to these texts and stories. It hasn't been possible to do that in the Northeast for a long time, so it's really fantastic that we have that opportunity now.
We have Advocating Classics Education, a new PGCE at Durham training teachers to teach classical subjects. So it's a brilliant time to be studying classics in the North.
Temples and fish markets, poetry and paintings, theatres, museums and schools. The Northeast is the country's leading regional centre for classics.